Hello, my name is John Peace with the Rural Route Review, and I'm here with my frequent co-host, Heather Moses. You want to introduce yourself right quick, Heather?
Hi, I am Heather Moses, and I am the chair of Wise County and City of Norton Democratic Committee. Born and raised a Republican, left that party and got a degree in political science. And the main reason I left was because working class people had been left behind.
And today we have a special guest from the City of Radford, Commissioner of Revenue. Kelsey, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. So my name is Kelsey Marletta. I am the new commissioner of the revenue in Radford. I was elected this past November and took office on January 1st. So I have only been sitting in this seat for about 3 months, not even so far.
Congratulations.
Freshman.
Yes. Thank
Freshman.
you.
Hey, Kelsey,
Yes.
let me tell you, we got viewers in Virginia, outside Virginia. We got viewers at my age, getting old. They have gotten bills, gotten mail from Commissioner of Revenue, and people have never really thought, what does the Commissioner of Revenue actually do? And that's my first question for you. What do you do as Commissioner of Revenue?
So our main, if you were to look us up, we are the chief tax assessing official in the locality. So we are the ones who assess your property, whether it's personal property, real estate, but we also do things like meals tax for the businesses, like for the restaurants, lodging tax, issue and renew business licenses. Um, let's see, we have different tax relief programs that we also offer, particularly for veterans and for the elderly and the disabled. I think those are two things that kind of get left behind because people look at us like that we're the ones that assess and then the treasurer of bills, and they forget about the relief that we can offer people. So that's a general scope of what we do. It's definitely many different facets that comprise the office that most people probably, as you said, do not have any idea happens.
Do they see it at the bottom of the assessment with their property and stuff? And I'm going to turn over the next section to you because we want to find out a little bit more about Kelsey.
Yes, we just would like to know why you decided to get into politics and what caused you to want to run for commissioner of Radford.
Well, I ran for the Radford City School Board in 2024, and there was five of us that ran, and I came almost dead last, and I was both incredibly defeated and surprised because I was the only one running that had worked in the school system, but also the only one and who also was a parent. So I had felt like that I was the ideal candidate for people because I could give the perspective from both sides. And that definitely was not the case. But I think the biggest reason why was because I ran during a presidential year, and running as a Democrat in a year like 2024 was incredibly difficult. You had that huge red wall to get over in Southwest Virginia, and we saw what happened. People would often say, "Oh, well, you're so fortunate because you're in Radford and they're blue." Well, no, we're not. Like it's more like purple. It's definitely not blue. I can tell you that for sure because, I had like threats that came out when I ran. There was things that were said to my son. He was a he was a fourth grader at the time.
Wow.
And, he faced a lot of like scrutiny, and then he faced it again when I ran this past time. But like I said, I did not do very well. And then when the commissioner who was here prior to me, when she decided that she was going to retire, she had reached out to me and she asked me, she said, have you ever thought about running for a constitutional office? And I was like, no. I was like, that I had never even gotten involved in local politics when I had lived in Roanoke, let alone when I first moved to Radford with my son being so little. And I have a son who will be 12 in July, and then I have twins that will be 3 in June.
Wow.
So I definitely was not thinking that I was like primed for local politics, like, whatsoever. I was like, "No, this is not for me." What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to balance being a new mom, a mom of an almost middle schooler, figuring out how to run, what you needed to buy, the yard signs, like all of it. I mean, there's so much that comes into it that you just don't realize until you're in the thick of it. And then you're like, oh my goodness, like this is a lot. And then social media makes it so much harder.
Just out of curiosity's sakes, because I know how expensive even local elections can be. Do you remember like how much it cost you out of pocket to run for commissioner?
So for commissioner, it was like 28 or 2,900, but I fundraised all that money.
Good for you.
For school board, actually fundraised and spent like 4,400.
Wow.
So, and I was the top, like I raised the most money for both of my campaigns both years out of everybody that ran, of course, on the local level. I had a lot of support from the Democratic committee. I had a lot of support from, people who knew me from when I had ran for school board who were supporting me for commissioner. So that was definitely very helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's still a lot, even if you are on the local level. I mean, signs alone I only ordered 150 of the standard yard signs that you see, and I was looking at like I think $800 or $900 at the end of the day. So, and that was for both years.
Think that the cost oftentimes can be a barrier to folks that want to run for local office. So I'm glad the committee stepped up and helped you out.
And you had people too that, I kind of got those same people who donated to me for school board donated to me for commissioner because either they had once been involved in the Democratic committee or they were previously elected local officials who I think wanted to see change. And I had people who donated, across the aisle. They were not all Democrats. I've had people support me in both of my campaigns who were across the aisle. And I think a lot of that comes down to the need for change, the want for people who look at things a little bit differently. I think younger people, we see that. I feel like we see that now happening across the nation, especially last year. 2024 was different. 2024, I think, was a whole different beast than 2025 when it came to running at all, no matter what you were running for.
Okay.
Because the contention in 2024 was so monumental because of the presidential that when it trickled down to the local, if you were a Democrat, then it was like, and you were trying to talk to somebody who was more on the right, then that was it. Like they were not going to vote for you.
That's actually one of the reasons that a lot of states started holding all of their local elections and statewide elections even in off years
And that
because
makes
they
sense.
felt like that whenever you held a statewide or especially a local election during a presidential election, it got overshadowed
Yes.
by partisanship. So I think that is a very wise move that more states should.
Yes. And you also, when you file to run for city council or, I think for you guys, it's a board of supervisors or for school board, you don't file with a party. You file to run as an independent. Ironically, when you file to run for a constitutional seat, you do file with a party line. And that's always surprising to people because really, when you look at it at the end of the day, this office is far more nonpartisan, impartial, or whatnot than what you see that ends up happening when you go to a school board meeting, when you go to city council. I mean, the personal politics come out in those meetings far more than they'll ever come out in this office
Exactly.
because we have to treat every citizen fairly.
Mhm.
When it's like that too, I think it throws people off because there's some people that want to run for school board because they are diehard MAGA and they have a point to prove and they want to get on that ballot and they want everybody to know it. And then when they find out that there's not an R beside their name, they're like, well, why not? But school board too should be nonpartisan, but it's not. And we know it's not.
Yeah. Well, Kelsey, you brought it up. I'm going to jump in here because you were talking about the job itself is nonpartisan because you have rules from Richmond that
Yeah.
you have to follow. And let's talk a little bit more about the Commissioner of Revenue, dive into that. When somebody walks in, doesn't matter whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, or a Whig party, you're there to help them keep their tax bill as low as possible by the rules and laws that you have to follow. And I want you to talk a little bit about that and your day-to-day activities.
So a lot of the assessments that we get are from like more from self reporting as opposed to, one of the most important things is that we do not set the tax rate. That is absolutely essential for everybody to understand. And I think that more people are becoming more aware of the local
Mhm.
governments and how they work. I think because of social media, I think because of what we have going on in Washington, again, it will trickle down to the local. And then they start asking questions and they're like, well, how does my property get assessed? Why does my car have this tax assessment on it? And then when you explain, like, so for us, we are not in house when it comes to our real estate. We hire an outside firm. We are on a 4-year cycle. So we'll enter into a new contract with a new firm come this summer. It'll commence next year, and then the values will be certified for January 1st, 2028.
Let me jump in there. You were talking about 4-year cycle. Let's talk to the viewers a little bit about what that exactly means. Because when you buy a house, you want the value to go up. I mean, that's your single largest personal investment you got. But let's say my house goes up 3% a year, which is a nice little return. And that's a normal increase in property values. But what happens in that when you only evaluate every 4 years, that's where people can sometimes say, well, it seems a little bit big sometimes, maybe the assessment.
Well, I think that, a lot of it's just going to come down to the market. I mean, if the market is not good, I mean, that's why there are some areas in Virginia that do 2-year cycles, and they're not going to see a significant increase the way that we saw, not this most recent reassessment, but the one for 2020, I know was a significant jump for Radford. And, people were, from what I understand from those that work in the office now, is that there was a lot of people who were really upset because their assessment went up a lot. And I know that there's been some localities that have moved from a 6-year cycle to a 4-year, and I can't imagine that because that's going to be a significant hike.
Yeah. Yeah. Even with that 3% average, that's
Yes.
18% every reassessment
Yes.
yearly.
Yes. And so I think that, keeping, their reassessment to the process is something that is incredibly important, I think, for more people to know about because we do not want to reassess people or the property rather and have them pay exponentially more in taxes. That's not the ultimate goal. We have, as you said, we have the code that we have to follow, and every locality has to do it. And I think that once you explain things to people in that manner, and also that you're basing it off of the fair market value, and you don't have somebody just going out there and looking at one house and assessing it at 275,000 and then going one block over and assessing the next one at, 750,000. Like that's not how it works. And I think of like for a lot of different government functions for both this office, for the treasurer, for the clerk of court, the information, if it's not out there, if they don't know how to access that information, then that's where people get really frustrated too.
What you got for us?
Or I was just thinking, all this talk about reassessment. Has Radford ever considered doing, in-house assessments? Is there a reason that they've always decided to contract out
Yes, the biggest reason why is because it would fall on me. We are only
small staff?
Yeah, it's myself and 2 others. So we do not have an assessment office. We do not have a personal property office. It is myself and my master chief deputy and our new deputy that we hired in the beginning of February, we are literally it for Radford. So if there was ever a situation where they decided that they wanted to move in-house, we would have to hire an assessor
Yeah.
who could work full time. And then we would also have to create the room for an assessment team because it would vastly change the makeup of the entire office.
Right.
Um,
That makes
what,
sense.
what is the size of Radford, and how many properties do you know off the top of your head? How many properties you deal with in the city of Radford for viewers that's not from Southwest Virginia?
So the last assessment that we had, we assessed right at 5,400 properties. Now those are not all taxable, because we have a university, and then just the other, exempt properties that we have. But that's what the last assessment firm did was 5,400, and our population sits around 17,000.
Okay. And I'll be honest with you, most rural counties and all of Southwest Virginia do not have in-house reassessment. That's the normal for Southwest Virginia. In fact, there's very few that do
I
in-house
think we're one
for
of
the
the
exact
only
reason.
ones.
Yeah, yeah, and stuff.
I think the only one that's moving over is Montgomery County.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be you guys and it'll be Montgomery. Yeah, it's a big task, and it's a big task regardless, but it would be for this office, it would be incredibly hard. I mean, it would add on a whole other layer to the office on top of, I already do all the components of the real estate that we need done outside of the years that we are in an assessment cycle. So it's, you know, that I mean, it would be a lot. It would probably be, I would imagine, very overwhelming,
I'm
especially in the
sure.
beginning.
I it's funny that they make you declare to run for a quote unquote constitutional office like a commissioner. Because really all you're doing is carrying out the rules that the state makes in Richmond and that the county commission or the city commission makes. And every state is different. I mean, you take like California, who passed Prop 13 in 1978, I think it was. They haven't, uh, you don't get your property reassessed in California unless you decide to sell your home. So, it varies from state to state. And basically, you're just carrying out the duties that are required by your job. There's really, like you said, any partisanship in the commissioner's role. I think it's important that people realize that.
Yeah, and it's that way for all the constitutional offices. We're all supposed to be nonpartisan. We're all supposed to treat every citizen, the same, regardless of whether or not you personally know that they lean to the right or they lean to the left. It's supposed to be that way. I think we see a couple of the constitutional offices, I think, are where you can see the politics maybe lie a little bit more. But like for this office, for the treasurer and for the clerk, I don't see where, personal politics would really play into it. I think maybe from a democratic perspective, when it comes to tax relief, we might be a little bit more sensitive to those vulnerable, like, to the vets and to the elderly and the disabled. I think that could be maybe one of the only areas.
Mm.
But even then, I mean, the commissioners that I know that lean to the right, they're still doing the same programs. We're still making sure that that information is put out to, that it's put out to the public, that they know that it's there, that the relief is given. You cannot, I don't think I've yet to hear of any commissioner that's withheld an application for relief because of, somebody's
Political affiliation.
politics. Like that's not going to happen. So it is very interesting. It'll be interesting to see if that ever changes and it's just becomes those that want to run for the office simply run.
Yeah. Quick question. What's amazed me in Big Stone Gap, rural Southwest Virginia, and Heather's in the real estate business, is we're actually even getting Airbnbs and rental houses, and that's affecting our real estate market, on driving up prices, because it amazes me that we have 3 or 4 or 5 of them in Big Stone Gap. I don't know. Of course, you're a college town with the University of Radford. Are you seeing changes in the real estate market because of, like, Airbnb, or what are you seeing?
We actually do not have that many Airbnbs.
Really?
We
Okay,
have, yeah, I think it's because a lot of them end up being either at the lake area. So
okay.
for Crater Lake and its proximity to Radford, I think that people will buy there to make that an Airbnb, of course, or maybe like in Blacksburg or Christiansburg, because then those people staying there would be able to go to like the tech games and whatnot. But we maybe have a handful that operate all year around as a Airbnb. It's just not, I don't know if it's because of the fact that the property, there's just not any of them that people want to convert into an Airbnb, or because we don't have the housing. I mean, we have a very right now, unfortunately, we have a very rough student housing shortage.
Know that they have a huge, huge problem with
Yes.
that at Virginia Tech. And I was going to ask about the student housing situation at Radford, because the university keeps growing in size, but there's nowhere to put these kids. So I'm sure that that's housing is something, finding enough of it is something that you all have had to struggle with as well.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I know that there's a lot of kids who have moved to the commuter status, and so now they're commuting from Floyd, Pulaski, Christiansburg, Blacksburg. While I was running for this office, I taught as a part-time professor at RU. And so I had a lot of students that told me that, they had lived on campus, but that when the housing went up for renewal in like the spring semester, that they couldn't grab one in time. And so they would have to move off campus. There's some that, of course, went to Radford High School. So then they just drive to RU because it's 2 miles down the road. But we yet it's going to become an even bigger problem as the university continues to grow, because also land-wise, we do not have any more land that they can take over. They can start building up if they want, but they can't build out anymore. So we're not like Virginia Tech, they still have a lot of land,
Right.
but we are not in that position because we are landlocked and we're only right at 10 square miles.
Wow.
I got one quick question. You were talking about the self-report. Is a lot of your job when you do you assess, like, the restaurant taxes, the meal taxes? Does that come through your office when a small business, a restaurant owner, does he self-report that to you, or how's that handled in the county? Because you know yeah,
Yes. Yes. So we have like a meals tax form. They're due a certain date every month, and they bring in their total sales, and we compute their taxes that way. And then they pay for their meals tax per month. They do the same thing, or they're, of course, supposed to do the same thing when it comes to like the sales tax for the state. So that's all self-reporting on their end. It's self-reporting too when they renew their business license or they pull out a new business license. They have to tell us the gross amount of receipts that they did the previous year, and then we base their new license on that amount.
did not know. Yeah, I tell you, it's one of the things that's a little bit different from a college town versus a non-college town. Is you probably have a lot more of them businesses and them type of businesses you deal with at your office versus a more rural commissioner of revenue. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm sure the business makeup, like the demographic of businesses is vastly different here than what it would be in Wise. Absolutely.
you know. Now, full disclosure, my son lived in Radford for 2 years, went to school there. My daughter lived there 4 years and went to school there. They were on campus just briefly, and then they rented from absentee management companies that owned the properties. Do you deal a lot with them? I'm just curious, and are they easy to deal with, or you tell me?
They they are relatively easy to deal with. Most of them are locally owned,
Okay,
and so they, I think, do what they need to make sure that their housing is compatible to the students. Student housing, of course, too, especially off campus housing, is going to look vastly different than, say what my house looks like, especially when some of these apartments and some of these townhomes and whatnot, have been there for several decades and maybe haven't had upgrades and have had, foot traffic for 60, 70 years, but they do very well. I have not had any issues with any of them. There's a couple of apartment complexes that I know are owned. One corporation is based actually out of Texas. So we do have, a decent amount of rentals that are owned by out of state individuals.
Well, at least you're not, having to deal with some of the, how do you phrase this? Some of the bigger cities and college towns, that suburb type areas where you have these big investor groups and venture capitalists that are buying up every single available house, refusing it to sell it back to anyone in the area, and charging huge rental fees every month on those. So it makes it a whole different animal in places like that to try to find a house to buy versus more rural areas. And I think that's why, even in your neck of the woods, you probably have people buy from out of state and come to the Radford and the surrounding area to retire, just simply because it's cheaper. It's cheaper, and they're willing to pay a bigger price than a local would pay, because it's still a deal from when you consider
Their
where they're moving.
perspective. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Well, Kelsey, we're getting near the 30-minute mark. I told you I wouldn't keep you too long and stuff.
That's fine.
Hey, I'm gonna let you pitch. I know you love Radford. I know you love the city of Radford, the university. Tell me about some. Okay, you've been on the job since January. Tell me about some of the pleasant surprises you've had.
I think one of the biggest things is just the support. I was really nervous coming in because my election was very, very tight. I only won by 34 votes, and those 34 votes came after the provisional ballots were counted. So I think that I was very nervous about that because I was like, you had 4,800 some people vote. You pretty much like split it down the line. Like that's, what I got. I didn't in working in the courthouse and working amongst the other constitutional entities and whatnot. I didn't really know what type of welcome to expect, but I think with everything that's going on in Radford right now and so much of the financial issues that have come up in the past couple of years, I think that there's been people who are really grateful for some sort of change. We have a brand new city manager. He started last July. Our city finance director just came back. She was in Radford, went to Pulaski, is now back in Radford. She came back in November. So I think our treasurer is new. Her and I, we have both ran together. We knocked 1,200 doors together. So, I think that that was a very pleasant surprise, was just the simple fact that we have gotten a lot of support and a lot of people have been, when they come up to the window or when we talk to them, it's more about there's more positive conversation than negative conversation, even if we have financial uncertainty. And I think that can also come from that myself and the two other women that I work for, probably 95% of the people that come in, we know between the three of us, whether it's myself who knows somebody or Peggy or Sandy. Like when you live in a city this small and they've lived here their whole lives, and then me being here for right at 10 years, I think that that's a that's a really good thing. I think it's good for them to see familiar faces, especially if they're not quite sure like where the city stands
Mhm.
for certain things. The other thing would just be the support that I've received from the commissioners association as a whole. That's been fantastic. That was something that I was told about when I was at the new officer training in Richmond, and I was like, I'm sure it's just like any other job. If you need somebody, then you can email and they'll, eventually get back to you, but it truly has been wonderful. Like I have ones that call me often, ones that text me, throughout the week asking me how I'm doing. And I think that's something that I definitely didn't expect, but it has been a lifesaver these first 3 months for sure.
I tell you what, I appreciate both of y'all coming on the show. Heather, as usual,
Sure.
Kelsey. I know that the people of the city of Radford, they're very blessed to have you as Commissioner of Revenue.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm so tickled to death to see a youth movement in local government. We're seeing it throughout Southwest Virginia, yourself included, Heather, being in charge of our committee. And I'm, for one, just tickled to death to see it. And I hope it just keeps progressing because it's time to pass the baton. And I
Yes,
think you're even seeing that nationally. I tell you what, people at the end of the day want responsible government. That's it. They want responsible.
absolutely.
It treats them fairly and accurately. And that's what you say you do in your job. No matter who walks in your office, you're going to treat them responsibly and accurately. And you want to just give them the best service you can. Appreciate it. Heather,
Thank
talk to you
you.
soon. And Kelsey, keep in
Have
touch. I
one
hope you come
last
back and
thing I
join us.
want to throw out there before we go, John. I
Yes.
just want to invite Kelsey and anybody that may be watching that's running for local office. We have the Wise County and City of Norton Democratic Party has got an event on April the 11th at Cafe Azalea. It starts at 1 o'clock, and we are going to have 9th Congressional District candidates there, candidates that are running against Morgan Griffith.
Okay, yes.
You're welcome to join us. We'd love to have the more the merrier. Get out and get to meet the people that are running for local office.
And I'll end with this. I'll put that information up on the YouTube description. I'll have that in the description of the videos. And Kelsey, I'll put your information there for any of the citizens of Radford. They got a problem, contact you. I know you'll take
Okay.
very good care of them. So
All right.
It's
Sounds
so
good.
nice to
thank y'all.
meet you, Kelsey.
Thank you.